Welcome everyone to the Spongy Moth residential management event. We're going to be talking about Spongy Moth today. If you're looking to get some ideas on how to manage it on your property, you've come to the right place. We have a pretty full schedule today. It's going to be divided into two segments. The first segment will be talking about the biology of the pest, and then going into the treatment options that are available to you, whether that's on a commercial level or on a do-it-yourself basis. We'll have a quick break after that to take questions from the audience. So I'd prefer if you have questions during it, save them until that portion so that we can get it all recorded, and so that our audience in the future can have those questions answered as well. The second segment will be talking about more of the history of the pest and what current conditions are in Allegan County, and a bit more about the costs of these management options and why the state hasn't been doing more towards managing this particular invasive species. So I want to start off with talking about the biology of the pest. So it's a moth. It's a caterpillar that is a defoliator, which if you've had it on your property, raise your hand if you've had spongy moth problems on your own property. Oh yeah, me too. So it's a voracious defoliator, so something that it feeds on leaves the entire time that it's in its caterpillar stage. Once it's in its adult form, the moth form, it doesn't feed anymore. It exists solely to mate. So after they hatch, which should be in the next 2 to 3 weeks, they feed nonstop for 7 to 8 weeks, which is where most of the complaints come from about the symptoms of this infestation. The males will feed for 7 weeks, and the females will feed for an additional week after that to get a bit bulkier and be able to produce eggs. The frass that they produce, which is the excrement, is slightly allergenic, so it can cause some allergic reactions like hives or itchiness, and it is also has a staining quality for concrete and wood, so it tends to be considered a nuisance pest for like property damage and things like that. It is known to be able to kill weaker trees, so like pines, younger trees, and stressed old trees. But many trees that are fed upon by the caterpillars can survive, and often do. They will reflush their leaves even after they've been completely eaten away. Not to say that it's something that we can really downplay. It can be a very significant disease and infestation for the forest. And there are things that we can do about it. So we have a guest speaker for today from Partial Tree Care. His name's James Retloff.
My name is James. I'm with Partial Tree Care Experts. I've been an arborist and practicing arboriculture for over 20 years now. Originally from Michigan, and I've kind of bumped around a little bit. I've been out in Colorado and back. Plant healthcare services is typically the service line that a tree care provider would be utilizing to treat trees. We have a couple different options, and traditionally people think of tree spraying. So tree spraying is essentially a technician comes out with a tank of mixture. They either use one of two different types of products. One is a bacteria that they add to the tank that is called BT, and that will kill the caterpillars. It's a bacteria that naturally forms in the environment, but they're surging that and spraying it on the caterpillars, and they kind of need to hit the caterpillars to actually kill them. They may need to make contact. There's also some pesticide labeled chemicals that tree care providers use. Pretty commonly used is bifenthrin. It's It's an insecticide that they'll mix up in that tank mixture. Once again, they have to actually hit the caterpillar form or the moth form. They typically come out somewhere between 2 and 3 trips in the caterpillar life cycle. Then the spongy moth will go into the egg mass. Spraying those egg masses don't do any, then it goes into the pupae. When it's in its cocoon and pupae form, the sprays don't do anything. It's protected. So we have to wait then again until the tree is attacked from the moth form, and once it's in that moth flying form, they'll start spraying again. Again, it only is effective when it makes contact with the insect. So it doesn't have any long life cycle to it. For the most part, any qualified arborist should steer you away from any treatments for spongy moth because of the natural life cycle, and then talk to you about other services such as making sure that your tree's appropriately watered, maybe giving it a fall fertilization program to help increase vitality, because the natural rise and fall of spongy moth, if a tree is really stressed already, it's most likely already on its downward spiral to being lost, and by just trying to kill, whether we're talking about the spongy moth, the caterpillar, or in the flying form, the moth form, it sometimes comes to be futile, because especially sprays, you're only getting what you're getting. And the reality is, in the caterpillar form, they'll climb to the top of the tree, they'll spin a little web, and they'll float to other trees. In the moth form, they'll fly to other trees. So just because you had somebody out treating on a specific day doesn't mean that the next day new insects come right back in. The other option that I typically use most often is one of 2 options of injections. So one is a trunk injection where we actually, and once I get done talking about this, I want to show a couple videos of this kind of in the shade so you can actually see it on my laptop. The trunk injection is recommended for trees over 20 inches in diameter. We're drilling into the trunk of the tree, and we're putting what's called an arbor plug, and I've got a graphic of what an arbor plug looks like. We're essentially installing a port into the tree that we can inject an insecticide into. That insecticide gives us about a 30 to 45 day residual. The label, I believe, says 30 days, but what I've noticed is we're targeting the caterpillar form, and very, very often, even after that 30-day life cycle's up, or that 30-day cycle's up, we're still seeing some caterpillar death. So it's a little bit longer than 30 days, but the label says 30. I have used that treatment multiple times. Typically, it's in areas of high traffic, high importance to somebody's property. A lot of times over like handicap accessible ramps, because now they're worried about the slope coming out of a building, and then somebody walking and slipping and having a bad fall from the excrement of the spongy moth fecal matter, or they're worried about it's an area where they're dining out on their deck, and like their life is outside, and they need to have a couple spots that they can harbor themselves from the insect. And so we treat trees specifically around these sites. We're not treating acreage. We're treating 1 or 2, sometimes 3 trees. The microinjection port system that I just explained, I try and steer away from that, to be honest with you. It's got some of the best results, because all the product 100% goes through the vascular system of the tree and translocates, and you do get some feeding from the caterpillars on the leaves, but it's minute damage because the caterpillars will die from eating the leaves. The other option is the exact same product, but we do it in a soil injection. So we put a probe into the ground. We don't have to drill in the tree at all. And then we inject the product into the subsurface level. The tree's root system will then uptake that product and translocate it into the leaves. And again, the caterpillar munch on those leaves and expire. Same thing, it's the same product. We're not just going out and treating a forest for it. We're treating select spots, common spots for us, other than decks and handicap accessible areas that we have, sometimes like right over somebody's parking area, right next to their garage is a common one. Another common one for us is around pools that we have to treat for them. But really we try and minimize that treatment area, because one important topic about spongy moth is it's got a life cycle that will have a surgence and then it'll collapse. And so you just have to kind of bear with it for a few years, and eventually it will collapse on its own. You don't have to spend a bunch of money to treat your trees. And a lot of those trees that do expire from spongy moth would have expired normally. There are some things that we can do, fertilization projects that we can do to help those trees, but a lot of times that just increases the chances of it not expiring. But there's always that chance. So, not every tree does a really good job at moving those insecticides into the foliage, but the product that I've been using and been applying selectively on sites for the last 7 years has been, I've trained other arborists on how to use it, and they were non-believers until we got it on board, and it's kind of changed the game for them, because now we're not going out and playing spray and pray where we hope that we get all the bugs, all the caterpillars. We're actually targeting, and we have a 30-day window that we know once we put this product down, a few days later it'll start moving through the tree, and we'll have protection for about 30 days. And some places the label says that sometimes you need to do a second treatment. If you use the micro injection system, a lot of times you don't have to drill new ports. You can just go with the same plugs. There's also a plugless system that some arborists use and some tree care providers use. The plugless system, you actually have to drill again. But the plug system, these ArborJet plugs, we have about 90 days where we can still put products into that tree without and we've got great research through ArborJet, the manufacturer of the plug. These have been around since really the start of emerald ash borer. And these ArborJet plugs get compartmentalized in the tree. They don't cause excessive damage. They create a board that's viable for, again, about 90 days that we can put products in, and we can do multiple treatments on as needed. If we get underneath the shade here, I'm happy to show those videos real quick. Any questions on soil injection versus topical sprays? I've got videos of both, and yeah.
Between the plug and the non-plug, is the non-plug still going into the tree or what?
Yeah, the non-plug micro injection is still going to the tree. They use most of the time it's a smaller hole into the tree. There have been some modifications out there that have used a bigger hole to get faster product uptake, but they essentially put a piece of metal into the tree for the application, and then that removes that piece of metal, because it's like think of it as like a large dialysis needle. It's kind of the way I like to think of it, but there's no plastic plug left behind. I don't like using that at all on oak trees because of the oak wilt problem. I don't like having that open injury to the tree. Whereas the micro injection using the plugged system, it at least gives us a sterile spot where we're not looking at getting oak wilt to translate or translocate into that tree.
Are those injected treatments specific to spongy moth? I mean, I've got quite a population of moths and caterpillars I enjoy seeing. So I understand that the sprays tend to generalize and would probably take out any caterpillar or similar larvae.
Yes.
But are the injections fine-tuned? No.
No. They're all targeting multiple things that would be chewing on those leaves. And so the spray version, you usually have overspray, and you have unexpected additional applications or off-site applications with a spray program, especially if you're in a forested area with like 70-foot tall or 100-foot tall oaks.
Yeah.
Whereas you're right with the soil injection and with the micro injection, it's still going to kill other insects, but at least it's only on that tree. You're getting no off-site damage.
So if you were spraying, you would be looking for the caterpillars to know your target. But when you're injecting, when do you time it? When there's an egg mass and you know it's going to?
So as an arborist, I typically start scouting for those egg masses in late October, early November, and I start seeing those evidence. Once I see those evidences, a lot of times I'll get calls from people that say that they need these applications, and I go out and look, and sometimes they're old egg masses that aren't viable, and so I tell them, like, this isn't warranted. Like, these are old egg masses, these aren't new egg masses. I can see those egg masses obviously all the way till hatch. We target the actually doing the application within 7 days before hatch to about 2 weeks after hatch.
Okay.
And after about 2 weeks, we still could get good control, but a lot of times people are upset about the damage that's already caused from the 2 weeks before the product starts moving throughout the tree. So a lot of times we're trying to get ahead of the game, and I can only take on so many clients.
Right.
To make sure that I can provide that service
So the
appropriately.
key to a homeowner is to call you in the fall.
Yeah. I mean, if you call and things are actively dropping, then you might get into our schedule, you might not.
Okay.
And it might be a conversation of it's too late at this point, and we can get you on the schedule for next year
Thank you.
as needed. Yeah.
If you see egg masses in the fall, why don't you get rid of them then?
You should, as a homeowner, get rid of those egg masses on your own. But the problem is, most people don't realize that those egg masses aren't just in the bottom 10, 20 foot of the tree. They're everywhere, and they can be 70 plus feet up in the air, they can be 100 feet up in the air, they can be on the tops of limbs, sides of limbs, in tight branch unions, so you're not going to get all of them. As a homeowner, every egg mass that you get, you're getting up to 600 caterpillars is typical of a large egg mass. So like, everyone counts to some extent, but the other part of that is you're not going to get all of them. And I would never recommend anyone to be jumping up on a 10-foot ladder or a 20-foot extension ladder trying to get egg masses out of a tree. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster. I'm going to show these videos. If you want to come underneath the show, is actually it's a crabapple spray, but it's the same type of equipment that we'd be using. Different product loaded into our tanks, but it's the same system for a spray, just so that you understand what that would look like potentially. Usually a Super Duty pickup truck, somewhere between a 350 and an F550 showing up at your home with a tank carrying up to anywhere between 400 and 900 gallons of water, and they can mix into smaller batches of about 100 to 300 gallons of product.
Can you make that picture bigger?
I will try.
Yeah, that's better.
This is kind of similar to if you've ever had somebody come out and do pressure washing. This is similar to that kind of system, or soft washing. But this is all this equipment's specifically used and built for tree care.
Is
So
this something that you would have to keep animals like dogs or cats away from the ground?
till the product dries. Yep.
Are those blue things part of it?
No, that's the site that we're at is actually just had a bunch of racks in front of it, and they're doing a modification of some of their building. So they were storing racks, and they wanted us to protect some crabapple trees for another disease. Come on. Nope, there. This is a photo that I was able to pull of two oaks that one was untreated and one was treated, of this product that we use. This is the equipment that our team uses. We have a gas-powered backpack that carries six gallons of product, and then we've got a soil injection probe to do all the soil injections, and we press a button, and that gives us an exact measurement of dosage on the tree, and then we can inject that, so we know exactly how much product's going in, because we have a counter as we're going.
Does that affect other insects in the ground, in the grass and stuff, like moles?
So each product has, if you look at the label, it tells you everything that it will affect, and it does affect things. We're doing this application typically within 5 feet of a trunk of a tree. That application gets absorbed by the structural and the feeder roots in the tree and sucked up pretty quickly. There's other than waiting about an hour to 2 hours, there's no risk to your dogs or cats or anything.
What
It's
I'm
just,
wondering is if the insects that are in the ground get insecticided,
yep.
then the birds that are eating the insects, will they be poisoned?
And the robin brings the worm out of the soil.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's all the different lessers of all evils, right? It's a system. So this isn't an organic system. If you want organic stuff, great. Love to help. There isn't a solution for getting the whole tree. Yeah. No, and I just wanted to be clerical. I don't have any experience or knowledge of insects that have died as off target and then a bird died or some other animal died. So,
You know, like the beetles inside the tree, and then the woodpeckers come, they might wreck that tree.
Right.
Which is almost by definition already
Right.
a tree on its way out.
right, yep,
Right?
you got it.
I wonder.
Yeah, you got, as an arborist, we have to look, is this tree viable
Yeah.
in the first place? Is there a bunch of, if there's a lightning strike on a tree, I might not recommend these applications on it because of the vascular damage. And then this is the ArborJet plugs. This is what a plug looks like seated. It's about 5/8 into the bark of the tree, and it then ends up getting seated in that spot, and that gives us a one-way valve port to put the product in and keep it into the vascular system. The sapwood will grab that product and move it into the canopy.
Does that plastic ever come out?
No,
So the tree just heals itself around?
trees don't heal; they compartmentalize their
Well,
wounds.
They grow around.
Yep.
Is the trunk injection any more or less effective than the soil injection? Because the trunk injection is going to limit any collateral damage to just what's in or arrives at that tree. The soil maybe invites more.
Yeah, but you're also you're also injuring the tree.
Well, that's not much of an injury. Didn't you say it had to have
You're putting one port every 2 to 3 inches around the circumference of this tree. It's not just one, it's one port per.
That's a lot of compartmentalizing.
Yes. Okay. Now these plugs are very, very tiny.
It's like doing maple syrup.
Yeah.
How many-
Smaller than maple syrup
How
even.
many ports do you put in a tree?
One per every 2 to 4 inches of diameter. So an arborist would always carry a D tape, and the first thing that they do before selling this service, or once it's a candidate to do one of these applications, whether it be a soil application or a trunk micro injection, we measure the diameter of the tree at 4.5 feet. That tells us how much product we need to put into the tree, because that's how all these labels are written up.
And does that product in any way injected into the tree have an impact on tree buds, floral bud formation, flowering out, pollen?
It's just an insecticide. There are other products that you can put in to reduce fruit, and some of those are successful. Some of them aren't, in my opinion. It's very, very dependent on time. So there are some products that can be used with microinjection systems that are fertilization, but most of the time we use just a soil application.
Does it affect the insects that wants to pollinate the flowers on the tree?
Yes, and that's why we try and do it when we try and do it. The timing.
Before the pollen. How about, I have a fiesta of acorn weevils in my little oak forest. They don't,
I'd have to check the label.
They particularly don't bother me, but I'm wondering if it gets into the into the acorn itself, would it?
I don't think it goes there. I think it's in the foliar tissue. It's not in the woody, the harder tissues. It translocates into that foliar leaf matter, and that's what the spongy moth's eating.
Yeah.
And then this is actually our team installing that using one of the micro injection systems. They're drilling into the trunk of the tree. Hold on, if I can do that again.
Yeah, what, how do you
Thank you.
drill those in?
Very low. So we're trying to get it in what's called the meristematic tissue down at the root flare. Once you get higher up in the tree, there's it's theorized that there's essentially like highways and vein vascular systems that go up to that side of the tree. If you start getting up to say 4 foot, 2 foot, if you're not down in that meristematic tissue, the product will go straight to that spot following that highway track. When you're down low in the root flare, where it's nice buttress wide, we actually found there's been some studies that have shown that you get distribution across multiple highways, if you will. So it diffuses better across multiple spots and then gets better up into the canopy, so it's not just in that one track.
It's going to travel all the way up to the upper canopy of a very tall tree.
100 plus feet, absolutely. Yep.
Who prefer the skyline view?
Yeah, I mean, if you're out in a wooded, I live in a wooded lot. Like, in a wooded lot, if I'm trying to protect where I'm, like, the back deck where I'm having a summer dinner party or something, like, the only way I'm protecting that is this system. The sprays are just not going to get there. Good spray equipment can get to like 90 feet, but it's still not, you're not going to get every spot. So the plug system or the soil injection system has been my preferred method, and the soil has been, to be honest with you, I'd rather not drill holes into trees unless I absolutely have to.
Do you find that if you do this to a tree that the following year you have to do it again?
It depends on if you have gypsy moth issues or spongy moth issues.
But I mean, that,
As long as you have issues, as long as you have a bunch of stuff going on in your woodlot, you need to do it yearly. It wouldn't be a one and done thing. It doesn't give you, this product that I use has on the label a 30-day residual.
right. sure he gets that every year. Not again.
Yeah.
So, I've got trees overhanging a deck, and the last 2 seasons, it has rained caterpillar poop. And I can see it is caterpillar poop by that little extrusion mark. How do I mean, these trees are so massively high. I have no prayer, even with a spotting scope, of really seeing if there are spongy moth egg masses or anything. And I've got so many trees with interlocking limbs.
Yep.
Right? Is there a way to know by the size, shape, and color of the poop if my problem is spongy moth that I could talk myself into getting rid of, or is it some other benign, beautiful moth that I would not intentionally send to its
Doom. Right. Well, it depends at the time of year that it's coming down.
Okay.
It also depends on, like, I spend a lot of time when I get these calls or have a person that had it happen last year or the last couple years. The number one tool I'm using when I show up is my binoculars.
Well, I've got that too, but again, most of us, if you live in the forest, you've got trees, branches, and it is.
Right, but the egg mass is very.
Well, I see egg masses on my property, and I see cocoons, and I know what they look like, and I take care of them, but that's one little.
That's also in the bottom 10 feet or less,
well,
right?
It's on my structures. It's
Right.
on my deck. It's on my shed. It's that. But when it rains caterpillar poo, is that telling me I've got a spongy moth problem that I'm not otherwise aware of, or is it?
If you've got what you're describing tells me that you have a spongy moth problem.
That's more likely to be spongy moth than.
We'll talk about some trapping methods as
Oh.
well, just a little bit.
Okay. I mean, this
If
is
you're
a
if you're
lot
fi- if you're
like
finding
caterpillar poop.
if you're
This is
finding
for-
spongy moth egg masses on your structures, on your trees, all around, and
But
you're
I'm
trying to
not seeing
protect
a lot
that,
of defoliation, not for years. But
Okay.
I'm still seeing, and I do know what they look
and
like.
you might have old unhatched.
No, I'm seeing the
No.
caterpillars too.
Okay.
But I'm not, I mean, last year I actually saw a lot of the, and I know what they look like. Thank you, iNaturalist. So that I'm seeing them, but I'm not, I mean, I'm looking up and I can see a few branches here or there that lost, that have been defoliated. Do I know it's a spongy moth? But it's just not been expansive. But again, for the cycle thing,
Yep.
when I saw so much caterpillar poop, I could hear it go plop.
Yeah, I've been.
Making this up on
I've-
my deck chairs, on my deck. It's like, okay, maybe the problem is bigger than I imagine it to be. Seeing my little nickel and dime, pretty little caterpillars that are actually evil, and so on.
Yeah, no, and I've got some clients that I protect some areas around their decks or around their pools, and there's one up in Fremont that they lost everything. They had concolor firs that the spongy moth attacked, blue spruce trees that they attacked, white pines, crimson Norway maples.
When you say lost, they died?
Yeah.
I think what she's asking
and if
is, how can she tell if it's spongy moth or something else?
Yeah, and we're going to go through trapping methods.
Okay.
So there's ways of identifying the egg sacs, and trapping methods can also help you there. So.
Well, thank you, James. It's very informative, and I think that it goes over quite a bit of the commercial aspects of what we can do on that side of things for spongy moth management. A lot of what we can do about managing the spongy moth is at the egg stage or the caterpillar stage of their lives. Once they're in their pupa, they're not invulnerable, but they're not susceptible to a lot of the control methods that are available to us. So what we'll be doing over the kind of DIY portion of it is figuring out what these egg masses look like, how we can identify them and destroy them so that it removes the caterpillars from the population. And then we'll also talk about trapping the caterpillars as they are feeding and using their life cycle and life habits to figure out how to trap them and how to determine they are a spongy moth. So we have an example over in the woods by this, so we'll take a short field trip over there, and we will talk about the strategies that we can use on a do-it-yourself basis. So this is a great example tree of what a old infestation looks like for a spongy moth infestation. You can see even low down on the tree there are some egg masses, but they'll be laid pretty much entirely across the tree, mostly on the undersides of branches where it's cooler and darker, but they'll be completely covering the tree. The newer egg masses, the ones that have viable eggs in them, will be a amber orange color and be firm to the touch. So they'll be not quite spongy as their name suggests. The older egg masses will have a much softer appearance to them, very fuzzy, and be spongy to the touch. And they're either nothing in them or non-viable eggs. So they have either already hatched or the eggs have died. The tree will often be covered in either newer ones or older ones, or in this case, a mixture of both, as it's an older infestation that's lasted for years. This is a good way to identify if you have a spongy moth problem, is if you have it all over the tree. Other native pests that leave egg masses on trees will not leave them in the amounts that the invasive spongy moths do. As for the caterpillars, once they hatch, which will be in the next couple of weeks, they have a particular life habit that is very useful for us to try and trap them. During the early stages, they will be mostly feeding at the tops of trees, but as they age, they will be trying to hide either in the leaf litter or in the grasses nearby, or trying to find cool, dark places to avoid the noonday sun. So as they're traveling up and down the tree, they'll be seeking out shelter in cool, dark places. You can wrap things like burlap or other thick cloths that trap light and keep it nice and cool around the edge of the tree, and they'll seek out these places. So they'll hide in this burlap, and as they're moving throughout dawn and dusk is usually their primary moving times. You can take a look under the burlap and dispose of them as you wish. You can either squish them, or my preferred way is to get a bucket of soapy water and just sweep them into there. The soap water kills them almost instantly. It messes with how they breathe. So it's a really good way to destroy them in mass, because you will get, on a tree like this, hundreds if not thousands of caterpillars that are moving up and down the tree. Each egg sac usually has, I want to say, 300 to 400 caterpillar eggs. So once they hatch, they'll be just everywhere on the tree. And as they are feeding for that next 7 to 8 weeks, you'll have ample opportunity to find them on these sort of traps, or spot them as they are moving up and down the tree. There are other methods that you can use that are similar to this. A sticky band is also used for this kind of trapping. You can put saran wrap around the tree or other plastic to keep the sticky material from sticking to the tree, basically. Can cause some negative health effects for the tree if you just spray it right on there. But having something like duct tape or saran wrap that goes around the tree, and then you apply a sticky substance to the outside of that, it can trap the worms as they are traveling up and down the tree, kind of like a sticky trap for mice or other vermin.
You put the sticky towards the tree?
You put the sticky on the outside of the tree, so as they're crawling down, they'll get trapped on that sticky substance.
And you put the duct tape around it so that the sticky part is out?
Yep, so it's just making doubly sure that you're trapping anything on the outside of the tree. Now on oak trees, it can be a little bit difficult to trap them that way because there are deep furrows in the bark, which is why I recommend something like Saran wrap, because it can kind of cover up those deeper furrows. Or in cases like that, these burlap bands are often the best method for trapping in that way. They have preferred host species. These lovely oaks are prime targets. You can see that they love these things and will lay their eggs all over them. But they have a variety of species that they can feed on. If you're looking through your woods, make sure that you're looking out for oak trees, because they are the ones that are primarily targeted. And then there are some other species as well, like Colorado blue spruce, and some ornamental varieties that don't have the same resistances that other native trees would in these situations. If that makes sense. Yeah, this site is at about 3 years of infestation, so it is at or near the peak of how many egg sacs and how many individual caterpillars you'll find. They have a pretty steep population crash, usually around year 4 or 5, where a virus builds up in the population and rapidly kills them off. So we're hoping this year that happens. Fingers crossed. That'll build up in the population as they're feeding and then wipe them out, usually around week 3 or 4 of feeding. The result after that is that there's a down period for about the same amount of time, about 3 to 5 years, and then the cycle starts over again. So this is what is considered a naturalized pest in Michigan. It's been around for a very long time, and it is something that is not dealt with on a statewide basis because of that long-term relationship it has with our forests. We'll talk more about like what has been done with it in the past in the second segment, and we'll talk about the impacts of invasive species and why we focus on the earlier onset of invasive species rather than the ones that have been around here for the longest. It's a lot to do with cost and risk analysis, but that's a topic for the latter half of this conversation. Yes?
How do you know how many years you're into the cycle of, can you tell?
Right, so the question was how often, or how can you tell how far into the cycle you are? And that's a very good question, because it can depend from forest to forest. One section of Michigan may be in like year 5 of an infestation, where it may be just starting in Allegan. The most common thing that you can look out for a late term infestation is the amount of egg sacs that you see. After they hatch, they're pretty vulnerable to the environment, so they tend to wash away or get brushed off with the wind or other natural events. So the more egg masses that you see, the later into an infestation that you are. So if you see tons and tons of them, you're likely at the latter end of it. If you're just starting to see them, it may be just the beginning. I get started with part 2 of our event here today, talking about basically the anatomy of a pest, what makes an invasive species an invasive species. Then we'll talk about kind of the history of what's been going on in Michigan for treatment of the spongy moth, and we'll go over the kind of costs and what other townships have done on a larger level for treatment of spongy moth. So a lot of questions I get are regarding spongy moth are, why did it get so bad? What has happened with this? Why is it such a problem? This has been around with us since the late 1800s. There was a entrepreneurial sort that brought over these worms from, I want to say, Central or Eastern Europe. Brought them over trying to make a silk industry. Now, spongy moth doesn't produce silk, so it was kind of doomed from the start. So they were accidentally or purposefully released after that failed venture, and it's been with us ever since. It started kind of in the eastern United States, and it's moved its way up into Michigan. I believe it was first spotted in Michigan in 1950. 1950s era, where it was kind of that starting infestation where it's just a few of them, and then it starts growing, and there's no natural predators, so it keeps growing. And then eventually we get to today where they're absolutely everywhere. So what happens with an invasive species to get to that point? Basically, there is a curve for how expensive treatments get for a particular invasive species. And the earlier you are in that curve, the easier it is to completely eliminate it and for less money, basically. So there are some species in Michigan where we're looking out for them so that when we find them, we can eliminate them right away and don't have to deal with them anymore. Just like, let's see, there's something like the Asian longhorn beetle, which is a wood-boring beetle similar to the emerald ash borer, except it feeds on a whole bunch of different species besides ashes. It's not in Michigan yet, but we're looking out for it because if we find it early, we can destroy it and make sure it stays out. So what happened with spongy moth is that it was allowed to keep going for long periods of time, or went unnoticed for that long, and eventually became naturalized. So something that it's gone up in population so much that the total cost to completely remove it from an environment, it's so exorbitantly high that no one would be willing to pay it, or even if we did put that much money into it, it may come back from neighboring states, or even in areas that we have treated that weren't treated completely 100% effectively. So we're at a point where what we can do about the spongy moth infestation is more asset management, where if we know a place doesn't have it, we can try and keep it out of that area. Or if we have a particular tree that we don't want to be infested with it, we can protect that individual tree, because that's where the most cost-effective treatments are going to be. So that's kind of the reason that spongy moth hasn't been completely destroyed, or there hasn't been county or statewide programs for it. It's because it's gotten to a point where those kind of programs are not as effective anymore. If it was back in the 1800s or back in the 1950s when we knew it was just coming in and we knew where it was, we could have a lot more effect there. But now we're at a point where it's left mostly to individual landowners to deal with it on their own properties. There are some areas of the state where it's not as present, and there are some areas where it's very, very present. I want to say 2 years ago around the Big Rapids area was when there was complete defoliation over thousands of acres. Those trees, a lot of them did die, and some of them rebounded from that either with limited growth or stunted growth afterwards, and that was kind of the last of it. I haven't heard of new reports of Big Rapids getting hit that big again, so that's kind of what we expect from peak populations and then the population crash. So there are other things that the state has done in the past after, I want to say the 1980s, 1970s were when they actually did have a program, a statewide introduction of a fungus that is very effective at destroying just spongy moth. The fungus that was introduced came from Japan. Yeah, it was from Japan. The fungus is called Entophamaga maimaima. So the scientific name translates roughly to insect eater. What it does is it grows inside the gut of the caterpillar and expands and eventually forms crystals inside their guts, and they die. You'll usually find them, if they're affected by this, kind of melted against a tree. It's pretty gross, but it's very effective. It's something that Oh yeah, sorry.
Is that something you bring in?
Right. So it's not something that needs to be brought in. The fungal spores that grow in the population, uh, they're persistent in the soil for up to 7 years, and basically every time that they grow inside one of the caterpillars and then get released as they are killed by the fungus, it resets that timer basically. So it's something that hasn't been reintroduced since the 80s because it's been persistent since then. The trick to this control method is that it's very sensitive to the weather. So since it is a fungus that gets into the caterpillar population, fungi are very dependent on water. So in the spring, when we want it to spread through the caterpillar population and get them infected and killed, if it's not raining or if it's not very damp or moist during that time period, if we have a very dry spring, the fungus isn't as effective, and it takes a lot longer for it to build up and destroy the caterpillars. So in springs like we've been having now, where we've had fairly regular rains, it's a lot more effective because it's building up that fungal spore base and is going to infect the next generation of caterpillars. Whereas in springs past, it's been very dry and we've had very big outbreaks of the spongy moth caterpillars. So, yes.
Is a spore thing? It's not. It's 7 years from that one caterpillar that dies, right? So then each year a different. You've got different 7 years. I mean, it's not like
Right.
cicadas, right? It's,
Right. It's not like insects or other expanding populations like that. It's something that it resets every time that there's new spores introduced. So it's very persistent. Doesn't need to be reapplied to a soil. It's present pretty much throughout all of Michigan now. So it's not something that needs to be introduced. You can spray it. You can get it exported to you, but it's not necessary. It's like I said, very dependent on the weather, and with climate change making weather a bit more unpredictable, you have either larger rain events that come once and then it's dry for a long period of time, or it's just unpredictably wet. You could have a very soaked spring, and that would be great for it, but the next year may be completely dry. So it's becoming a less reliable control method because of these effects of a changing climate. So that's the one kind of natural control method that was introduced. There is a virus that is present in the population that builds up over time, and that's what causes these sort of outbreak cycles to happen. Every 3 to 5 years, basically you reach a peak of their population, and something about this population amount, or the amount that's feeding, or just the contact in between individual caterpillars, causes this virus to activate and kills a large swath of them. The appearance of the caterpillars that are killed by this virus, it's very handy to know because it creates a V shape. They seek out high places, it changes their behavior, and they'll bend over and cause basically burst open from the virus. Very brutal way to go, but it's something that it's working when you see this happen. So V virus is in the population and is expanding. Let's see. Other things the state has done. There have been programs that have been done on a local level, either like township or county levels, that spray with BT, which was the chemical that James had mentioned earlier. BT is a bacteria that is very particular to lepidopterans, so moths and butterflies. It doesn't really affect any other type of insect, but it does affect all moths and butterflies. Spongy moth comes out at a particular time period during the year where nothing else is really active yet, except it has a slight overlap at the very end of its hatching cycle of monarch butterflies, which is generally, we don't like to affect them. They're a beautiful species. It's something that we don't want to harm in any way. It very rarely happens to have overlap with them, but it has the possibility of harming monarch populations. Let's see. I think that's all I have for the history of what's been going on in Michigan. So I think Brian is going to be talking about the local efforts that have been going on. Oh, yes.
I had a question about that. So if you were then to spray earlier with that and not get into that end of the lantern, you still might have a chance of some lanterns still hatching, but you're not going to then kill the monarchs too, right? Is that kind of how you work? I mean, that one is.
Yeah, that's for a spongy moth. It's a very particular time period that we want to spray in to affect just them. So the earlier in the year, basically that's for the better. We don't want to get it too late that it's getting more types of moths and butterflies.
So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, why doesn't the town or township or the county do, a broader program and address, spongy moth concerns? And there are a number of townships and counties throughout Michigan who do have active programs. As Ben mentioned, they do an aerial application of this BT insecticide, and so this is something that needs to be on the leaves while the caterpillars are eating them, and then those caterpillars need to be small enough to be susceptible. And the reason that we use that chemical is used is because it has a really low residual time in the environment. So it comes off with rain easily, and that's one of the benefits. It has few off-target impacts, as Ben discussed, but that also means that timing is really critical. And so these treatments are pretty touchy. If you're off by, a couple of weeks, the caterpillars are only active for, a month or so, then they're ineffective. Or if there's a rain shortly after application, it's also reduces the effectiveness. So this is something that really needs to be thoroughly scouted ahead of time to find those key population centers and to prioritize lands that need to be treated, and then schedule that treatment for the April or May when that hatching happens, and then it needs to be executed, and the weather's got to be good for it. So these programs typically have a dedicated millage, dedicated team for that scouting process, and then working with the sprayer to make sure that landowners who don't want something sprayed on their property can, get an exception, can get passed over for those applications. Cost-wise, some townships around us, Ada Township is one in Kent County that has a program. It costs them about $200,000 for a spray program, and that doesn't cover the whole township. Those are, again, those targeted areas where there's a key population. Some other counties also have a program where they have a dedicated millage that runs about $350,000 a year. So these are big costs, and they require a lot of staff, personnel, and expertise in order to get that treatment done effectively. And so that's why a lot of times, as James recommended, and some other arborists, if you want to watch videos of our previous presentation, we had another arborist company talk about treatments and what they focus on. The recommendation is pretty consistently that you identify those trees where raining poop is going to be an issue for you, and then do focused treatments on those areas. And so that might be those great grandfather oaks that you really want to protect, or something over your sidewalk that's really critical. And James, I don't know if you wanted to touch a little bit on costs of that individual care and what that sort of looks like for homeowners.
So costs range in all the different application methods. Topical sprays or foliar sprays are typically the lowest cost, but every company typically has a minimum cost of between $100 and $150 just to show up to do applications for a residential site. The problem with that I always run into with sprays is you're looking at multiple sprays. So you're looking at a couple $100 for that versus a a soil injection application, which is typically somewhere between $10 and $15 per diameter inch of the tree. So if you've got a 10-inch diameter tree, you're probably looking at $100, but they're anywhere up to $150 for that one tree. But that's giving you that residual 30-day application. You may need to get a second application. My experience is I've never had to do that second application because it usually gets it under control in the first. And then the direct injection, which puts all the product in through the tree IV system, the ports, that is in that $10 to $15 per inch. But that process takes a little bit longer than the soil injection services, because you're drilling into the tree, you're installing that port, and then the technician's waiting there until the product is absorbed into the vascular system of the tree before they can leave. Most people have somewhere around $125 to $150 startup fee just for them to get on the property and do anything. The micro injections can only be done on larger trees, and they have to have a minimum diameter of 5 inches to do that. But I usually don't recommend those until you're in the 20+ inch range for those larger trees.